My parents picked alcohol over my acne medication, and it ruined my life. Now, my mom wants me to cover her surgery. Growing up poor was something I learned to accept fast because I never had a choice. We lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment where the heat barely worked in winter, and the air conditioning was just a fan aimed at your face. I went to a public school where I wore the same 5 outfits on repeat and hoped no one noticed. Can you imagine your own mother sending you an invoice for your childhood? Not just any invoice, but a detailed breakdown of every diaper, every doctor's visit, every single meal you ever ate, adding up to a cool $200,000, and demanding you pay it back? Because I lived it. And it was the moment I realized the people who were supposed to love me most were actually trying to bankrupt my soul. Transition to a more reflective, somber tone. Growing up, meals out were a foreign concept. According to my mom, feeding 3 people was just too extravagant when I could simply eat their leftovers. Birthdays were the lone exception, and even then, my grand celebration was choosing between McDonald's or Taco Bell. I never got Christmas presents, no Easter baskets like the other kids. The worst part, I knew we weren't as broke as they claimed. My dad always had money for his bottles, arriving home like clockwork with a fresh supply every week. But somehow there was never enough for school supplies or new shoes when mine had holes. I resented them for it deeply, but what was the point of saying anything? I just kept it inside. By sophomore year, I'd accepted my place at the bottom. Lunch was eaten in bathroom stalls because sitting alone in the cafeteria felt like wearing a giant, flashing sign that screamed, "Nobody wants me." I hid in the back of every class, speaking only when absolutely forced. At home, my escape was coding. It was free, it was endless, and it was mine. Shift to a hopeful, almost wistful tone. Then junior year, everything changed. His name was Julian, an exchange student from France. Tall, wavy brown hair, a smile that made every girl's heart melt. I was assigned to help him, because apparently I was the only student who actually paid attention in French class. I figured he'd ditch me for the popular crowd within a week. But he didn't. He thought the girls throwing themselves at him were ridiculous, and he'd whisper jokes about them to me in French. We grew close, and I started feeling something I never had before, something warm, something good. Then he asked me on a date. He told me to dress nice, that we were going somewhere special. I pulled out my best outfit, and he showed up in a full suit. He took me to McDonald's. A small, fond laugh. We sat there, eating chicken nuggets in formal wear, laughing until my stomach hurt. It was the happiest night of my life. The tone shifts sharply, becoming raw and hurt. But happiness doesn't last when you're me. The next week, the popular girls cornered me. Their words were acid. "How did someone like you end up with him?" they sneered. "Has he seen your skin up close?" They pointed at my acne and laughed, promising he'd leave the second he realized what he was dating. I went home and did something I never did. I asked my parents for something. I begged my mom for acne cream. It was maybe $20. I swore I'd never ask for anything again. She looked at me, cold, and said no. "Your dad needs that money," she said. I cried myself to sleep that night, and many nights after. Their words, the girls' words, echoed constantly in my head. I stopped looking Julian in the eyes. I started canceling our plans, avoiding him. He kept asking what was wrong, but I couldn't tell him. Eventually, he stopped asking. By the end of the semester, he was dating someone else. A fierce, determined tone emerges. I went back to coding, but this time there was a fire inside me. I taught myself everything, applying for internships before graduation. I landed one at a major tech company. I worked harder than anyone. 10 years later, I was making more money than my parents would see in 5 lifetimes. They found out through relatives, and suddenly they wanted a relationship. First, it was help with rent, then a new car, then a bigger house. I gave them everything, hoping, praying, maybe now they would love me. The voice hardens, filled with simmering anger. Last month, my mother called. She asked for something that made my blood run cold. She wanted me to pay for a facelift and Botox. She said she deserved to feel beautiful in her older years. I asked her if she remembered. I asked if she remembered when I begged for a $20 acne cream, and she chose alcohol instead. She went quiet, a pause heavy with emotion. I told her that decision cost me the only boy who ever made me feel worth something. I told her I would not pay for her face when she refused to help mine. She called me ungrateful. My dad screamed that I owed them for raising me. I hung up. They've told the whole family I'm a monster who abandoned her parents. But what they don't know, I recently tracked down Julian. The tone shifts to a nervous, hopeful anticipation. He's back in the States. He's single, and he remembers me. I stared at his profile picture for the third time today. My finger hovered over the message button, the cursor blinking, daring me. Julian, back in the States, just 2 hours away, working as a translator. Single, according to the complete absence of couple photos on Instagram. My heart did that stupid racing thing it used to do when I was 16. But now there was also this cold fear sitting in my stomach. What if he didn't remember me the way I remembered him? Or worse, what if he did remember and wanted nothing to do with the girl who ghosted him without explanation? I opened the message box, typed something, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Too casual, too desperate, too formal, like I was applying for a job. I drafted 5 different versions before finally settling on something simple. Hey, I saw you're back in the country. Would love to catch up sometime if you're interested. My hands shook as I hovered over send. This was stupid. He probably wouldn't even respond. Or he'd be polite but distant. Or worst of all, he'd remember exactly how I treated him and tell me to leave him alone. I closed my eyes and hit send before I could delete it again. I put my phone face down on my desk, trying to focus on work. 20 minutes passed. Each minute felt like an hour. Then my phone buzzed. I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it. His reply, right there on my screen. Oh wow. Hey, I'd love to catch up. Are you still in the area? My chest got tight. He remembered me. He wanted to see me. I read his message 3 more times to make sure I wasn't imagining the enthusiasm. We exchanged messages throughout the day. It felt easy, natural, like no time had passed, even though it had been 10 years. He asked about my tech career. He told me about moving back from France. Then he brought up the McDonald's date. Still one of my favorite memories from that year, he wrote. We were so overdressed for nuggets. I laughed out loud at my desk. Melody, my coworker, glanced over with raised eyebrows, but I ignored her. He suggested dinner next weekend. My brain immediately started spiraling. What if I was different than he remembered? What if he was disappointed? What if I said something stupid? What if the popular girls were right and he realized I wasn't worth his time? But I typed yes before I could talk myself out of it. Saturday at 7 o'clock. It was happening. A brief, anxious pause. The next morning, my phone rang. Mom. I considered not answering, but that would just make her call more. I picked up. Her voice was different this time. Sweet. Soft. Like honey. Sweetie, she purred. I've been thinking about what you said. I want you to understand why this surgery is so important to me. As women age, society treats us differently. I just want to feel beautiful again. Is that so wrong? Here we go. A new angle. The reasonable approach. As if I just understood her perspective, I'd hand over the money. Mom, I said, my voice firm. I'm not discussing this anymore. She started crying. Loud, dramatic sobs through the phone. I ended the call. Work became my escape again. I threw myself into a new project. Code doesn't judge me. Code doesn't manipulate me. Code does exactly what I tell it to do. But Melody noticed I was distracted. She pulled me aside at lunch. You okay? You seem off. I gave her the basic outline. Parents want money for cosmetic surgery. I said no. Family drama. She nodded slowly. I went no contact with my parents 5 years ago. Best decision I ever made. She didn't push for details, just told me I wasn't overreacting. That validation helped more than she knew. That evening, my father left a voicemail. I listened once. His voice was angry loud. He called me selfish, ungrateful. Then he listed everything they did for me. We kept a roof over your head. We fed you. We clothed you. We sacrificed so much. Rage built in my chest. He was listing basic legal requirements for having a child like he deserved a medal. Feeding me leftovers wasn't sacrifice. Keeping the heat barely working wasn't sacrifice. Choosing alcohol over my needs wasn't sacrifice. I saved the voicemail in a new folder on my phone. Documentation, just in case. The tone becomes more intimate, vulnerable, as if confessing, the week dragged by. Each day, longer than the last. I caught myself thinking about Saturday constantly. What should I wear? How should I do my hair? Should I wear makeup? I hadn't obsessed over my appearance like this since high school. I went shopping, bought 3 different outfits, returned 2. The one I kept looked nice, but not like I tried too hard. Casual but put together. My skin was clear now. Years of proper skincare I could finally afford had fixed most of the acne, but the scars were still there, faint but visible. Old insecurities whispered that he'd notice, that he'd see them and remember why he upgraded to someone prettier. Saturday finally arrived. I changed clothes twice before leaving my apartment. The restaurant was a mid-range Italian place, nice enough to show effort, but not so fancy it felt like too much pressure. I parked and checked my reflection in the car mirror one more time. My hands were shaking. I walked inside and scanned the room. He was already there, standing near the hostess stand. When he saw me, his face lit up. He was taller than I remembered, broader, but his smile was exactly the same. Warm, genuine, directed entirely at me. My heart did that stupid racing thing again. We sat down and ordered drinks. The conversation flowed easily at first, surface level catching up. He told me about France, about studying linguistics, traveling through Europe, coming back to the US for job opportunities. When he asked about my life, I focused on work, on my success, on the career I'd built from nothing. I left out the parts about my parents, about the money, about the current mess that was too heavy for a first date or reunion or whatever this was. Halfway through dinner, his expression changed. It got serious, a little sad. I never understood why you pulled away from me. Junior year, he said quietly. I thought maybe I did something wrong, or moved too fast, or misread what we had. My stomach dropped. The guilt hit me hard. He spent years thinking he was the problem, that he messed up somehow, when really it was me. My insecurity, my inability to believe someone like him could actually want someone like me. A confessional, raw honesty. You didn't do anything wrong, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Then I told him the truth. About the popular girls. About their comments. About begging my parents for acne cream. About them choosing alcohol instead. About how their words got inside my head and convinced me he would leave. Eventually, so I should leave first. His face went through several emotions. Surprise, understanding, then anger. But not at me. At them. At my parents. At the situation. He reached across the table and took my hand. His hand was warm, solid, real. I never cared about your skin, he said, his gaze unwavering. I thought you were beautiful then. I think you're beautiful now. Something broke loose in my chest. Something that had been tight for 10 years. We stayed at the restaurant, talking until the staff started stacking chairs around us. The hostess gave us a pointed look. We finally left. He walked me to my car. The air was cold, but I barely noticed. Can I see you again next weekend? He asked. Yes, I said immediately. No overthinking, no talking myself out of it. Just yes. He hugged me. His arms around me felt safe, familiar, like coming home after being lost for a decade. I drove home with my mind racing, my chest feeling lighter than it had in months. The mood darkens abruptly, a sense of betrayal creeping in. Then my phone started buzzing. Text after text. Family members I barely knew. My father's sister. 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. My mother's brother. All saying the same thing, disappointed in me. Can't believe I'd abandoned my parents. They need me. I'm being selfish. I realized my parents had launched a full campaign, turning the family against me, making me the villain in their story. I screenshot everything, added it to my documentation folder. My good mood from dinner evaporated. Sunday morning, I woke up to my phone going off like crazy. Text after text. Notifications piling up. I grabbed my phone and started reading. My mother had posted on Facebook. Not about me directly, but it was obvious. She wrote about how some daughters forget where they came from, how they get successful and abandon their aging parents who sacrificed everything, how she's getting older and needs help, but her child turned her back. The comments were full of relatives I barely talked to, saying how sorry they were for her, how disappointed they were in ungrateful children these days. My aunt left a heart emoji. 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years wrote long, supportive messages to my mother. I screenshot every single post and comment, added them all to the folder on my computer labeled documentation. My hands shook while I did it. The public manipulation made my stomach turn. She was painting herself as the victim, making me the villain. And people believed her because they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the alcohol, the neglect, the $20 acne cream she refused to buy. I spent the rest of Sunday researching therapists. I typed in family trauma and boundary setting. Read through profiles. Most sounded too clinical, too distant. Then I found Laura Patty. Her bio talked about childhood emotional neglect, recognizing patterns of manipulation, building healthy boundaries with toxic family members. Everything she described sounded like my life. I booked a consultation for Wednesday evening, the earliest she had available. Clicking that confirm button felt huge, like I was admitting something I'd been avoiding my whole life, that my childhood wasn't just about being poor. It was about being unwanted. Taking this step scared me, but it also felt right, like I was finally doing something for myself instead of just surviving. A glimmer of stability, then another confrontation. Monday morning, I got called into an unexpected meeting. HR and my manager wanted to see me. My stomach dropped immediately. I thought my mother found my workplace somehow. Called them with some story about me being unstable or cruel. I walked into the conference room, preparing for the worst. But they smiled when I sat down. They told me Melody had expressed concern about my stress levels lately. They wanted to offer me 2 weeks of paid personal leave if I needed it. No questions asked, just support. The relief hit me hard. I thanked them, but said I'd let them know if things got worse. Right now, work was the one stable thing I had. The one place where I was valued for what I did instead of what I should give. Walking back to my desk, I felt grateful. Melody caught my eye and gave me a small nod. She didn't have to do that, but she did. Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Julian. He asked if I wanted to meet for coffee this week instead of waiting until the weekend. My heart did that stupid racing thing again. I suggested Thursday after my therapy appointment. He responded within seconds, saying that works perfectly. No questions about why I had therapy. No judgment, just easy acceptance. That simple response made me like him even more. Most people would ask, would want details, would make it weird, but he just agreed and said he was looking forward to it. I put my phone down and smiled for the first time all day. The therapy journey begins raw and revealing. Wednesday evening arrived. I drove to Laura Patty's office. It was in a professional building downtown, clean, quiet, calming in a way that felt intentional. She greeted me in the waiting room. Mid-40s, maybe, kind eyes, comfortable clothes. We sat in her office, and she started asking questions about my childhood. Simple questions at first. Where did you live? What were your parents like? How did you spend your time? But then the questions got harder. She asked about specific memories, about how I felt, about what I needed but didn't get. I found myself crying as I described the birthday meals at fast food restaurants. The same 5 outfits I wore to school. Things I thought I was over. Things I told myself weren't that bad. She listened without interrupting. Then she said something that stopped me cold. She told me I was minimizing what happened, that I kept calling it growing up poor when it was actually my parents choosing alcohol over their child's needs. The difference hit me hard. Poor means you don't have money. What I experienced was having money that went to bottles instead of me. Laura asked me to describe the acne cream incident in detail. Eventually, so I should leave first. His face went through several emotions, surprise, understanding, then anger. But not at me. At them. At my parents. At the situation. He reached across the table and took my hand. His hand was warm, solid, real. "I never cared about your skin," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I thought you were beautiful then. I think you're beautiful now." Something broke loose in my chest. Something that had been tight for 10 years. We stayed at the restaurant, talking until the staff started stacking chairs around us. The hostess gave us a pointed look. We finally left. He walked me to my car. The air was cold, but I barely noticed. "Can I see you again next weekend?" he asked. "Yes," I said immediately. No overthinking, no talking myself out of it. Just yes. He hugged me. His arms around me felt safe, familiar, like coming home after being lost for a decade. I drove home with my mind racing, my chest feeling lighter than it had in months. The mood darkens abruptly, a sense of betrayal creeping in. Then my phone started buzzing. Text after text. Family members I barely knew. My father's sister. 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. My mother's brother. All saying the same thing, disappointed in me. Can't believe I'd abandoned my parents. They need me. I'm being selfish. I realized my parents had launched a full campaign, turning the family against me, making me the villain in their story. I screenshot everything, added it to my documentation folder. My good mood from dinner evaporated. Sunday morning, I woke up to my phone going off like crazy. Text after text. Notifications piling up. I grabbed my phone and started reading. My mother had posted on Facebook. Not about me directly, but it was obvious. She wrote about how some daughters forget where they came from, how they get successful and abandon their aging parents who sacrificed everything, how she's getting older and needs help, but her child turned her back. The comments were full of relatives I barely talked to, saying how sorry they were for her, how disappointed they were in ungrateful children these days. My aunt left a heart emoji. 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years wrote long, supportive messages to my mother. I screenshot every single post and comment, added them all to the folder on my computer labeled documentation. My hands shook while I did it. The public manipulation made my stomach turn. She was painting herself as the victim, making me the villain. And people believed her because they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the alcohol, the neglect, the $20 acne cream she refused to buy. I spent the rest of Sunday researching therapists. I typed in family trauma and boundaries setting. Read through profiles. Most sounded too clinical, too distant. Then I found Laura Patty. Her bio talked about childhood emotional neglect, recognizing patterns of manipulation, building healthy boundaries with toxic family members. Everything she described sounded like my life. I booked a consultation for Wednesday evening, the earliest she had available. Clicking that confirm button felt huge, like I was admitting something I'd been avoiding my whole life, that my childhood wasn't just about being poor. It was about being unwanted. Taking this step scared me, but it also felt right, like I was finally doing something for myself instead of just surviving. A glimmer of stability, then another confrontation. Monday morning, I got called into an unexpected meeting. HR and my manager wanted to see me. My stomach dropped immediately. I thought my mother found my workplace somehow. Called them with some story about me being unstable or cruel. I walked into the conference room, preparing for the worst. But they smiled when I sat down. They told me Melody had expressed concern about my stress levels lately. They wanted to offer me 2 weeks of paid personal leave if I needed it. No questions asked, just support. The relief hit me hard. I thanked them, but said I'd let them know if things got worse. Right now, work was the one stable thing I had. The one place where I was valued for what I did instead of what I should give. Walking back to my desk, I felt grateful. Melody caught my eye and gave me a small nod. She didn't have to do that, but she did. Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Julian. He asked if I wanted to meet for coffee this week instead of waiting until the weekend. My heart did that stupid racing thing again. I suggested Thursday after my therapy appointment. He responded within seconds, saying that works perfectly. No questions about why I had therapy. No judgment, just easy acceptance. That simple response made me like him even more. Most people would ask, would want details, would make it weird, but he just agreed and said he was looking forward to it. I put my phone down and smiled for the first time all day. The therapy journey begins raw and revealing. Wednesday evening arrived. I drove to Laura Patty's office. It was in a professional building downtown, clean, quiet, calming in a way that felt intentional. She greeted me in the waiting room. Mid-40s, maybe, kind eyes, comfortable clothes. We sat in her office, and she started asking questions about my childhood. Simple questions at first. Where did you live? What were your parents like? How did you spend your time? But then the questions got harder. She asked about specific memories, about how I felt, about what I needed but didn't get. I found myself crying as I described the birthday meals at fast food restaurants. The same 5 outfits I wore to school. Things I thought I was over. Things I told myself weren't that bad. She listened without interrupting. Then she said something that stopped me cold. She told me I was minimizing what happened, that I kept calling it growing up poor when it was actually my parents choosing alcohol over their child's needs. The difference hit me hard. Poor means you don't have money. What I experienced was having money that went to bottles instead of me. Laura asked me to describe the acne cream incident in detail. I started talking, and suddenly I was 16 again, begging my mother for $20. Her looking at me like I was asking for something ridiculous. Her saying no without hesitation. Her saying my dad needed that money. I broke down completely, sobbing in a way I hadn't in years. Laura handed me tissues and waited. When I could talk again, she helped me see something I never understood before. The cream itself wasn't the real issue. It was the pattern. My needs being dismissed over and over as unimportant compared to what my parents wanted. By the end of the session, I was exhausted, wrung out. But something important had shifted. I could feel it, even if I couldn't name it yet. Julian's unwavering support and a bold, new step. Thursday afternoon, I met Julian at a coffee shop near my apartment. Walking in, I saw him already at a table by the window. He stood when he saw me, hugged me hello. We ordered drinks and sat down. The therapy session was still fresh in my mind, raw. He asked how my week was, and I found myself opening up more than I planned. I told him I'd started therapy, that I was dealing with family stuff. He didn't push for details, just listened. Then he shared something I didn't expect. He told me he'd seen a therapist for 2 years after a difficult breakup, that it helped him understand himself better, figure out what he wanted. His openness about his own struggles made me feel less broken, less alone. Like needing help didn't make me weak or damaged. We talked for 2 hours. The conversation flowed easy, natural. When we left, he walked me to my car and kissed my cheek. Told me he was glad I was taking care of myself, that I deserved support. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Friday morning, I was at my desk, working through code reviews, when my phone buzzed. It was the doorman downstairs. He told me my parents were in the lobby asking to come up. My stomach dropped. Sweat broke out on my palms. I told him no. I said to inform them I wasn't available. He said he understood, and the line went quiet. I walked to my window and looked down at the building entrance. From 12 floors up, I could see two figures near the front desk. My mother's gestures were big, dramatic. My father stood with his arms crossed. They were talking to the doorman, and I watched him shake his head. My mother put her hands to her face. Even from this distance, I could tell she was crying. My father leaned forward and pointed at the doorman. The doorman stepped back and picked up the desk phone. Security, I assumed. My hands shook as I watched this play out. The power I had right now felt strange. I said no, and someone actually listened. My phone rang. My father. I let it go to voicemail and waited. 30 seconds later, the notification appeared. I pressed play, and his voice filled my ear. He was yelling about how I was going to talk to them whether I liked it or not. He said they'd wait in the lobby all day if that's what it took. He said I owed them this much after everything they'd done for me. His voice was slurred slightly. Drunk already, and it wasn't even noon. I hung up and dialed building security. A woman answered, and I explained the situation calmly. I told her these people showed up without permission and were refusing to leave. I said I didn't want them here and I needed them removed. She asked if I felt unsafe, and I said yes without hesitation. She told me a guard was already down there and they'd be escorted out. I thanked her and ended the call. Back at the window, I watched a security guard in a dark uniform approach my parents. My father gestured wildly. My mother was still crying. The guard pointed toward the door. My father shook his head. The guard said something else, and my father's body language changed. He looked up at the building like he was trying to figure out which window was mine. The guard touched his radio. My father must have realized he wasn't winning this, because he turned and walked toward the exit. My mother followed him, but kept looking back at the doorman. They disappeared from view, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The boundary held. I enforced it and it worked. But the feeling wasn't relief. It was weird and uncomfortable, like wearing shoes that don't fit right. This is what setting limits feels like, and I wasn't used to it. The invoice drops, a heavy blow. That evening, I was making dinner when my email notification pinged. The sender name made my chest tighten. My mother. The subject line, "We need to talk." I opened it, even though every instinct told me not to. The email was long, really long. She started with the day she found out she was pregnant with me. She described morning sickness and how hard the pregnancy was on her body. Then she listed every expense from my childhood: diapers, formula, doctor visits, clothes, food, school supplies. She had itemized 18 years of raising a child like she was sending me an invoice. At the bottom, she'd added it all up, $200,000 she claimed. She said, "This is what I cost them, and paying for her surgery is the least I can do." She said, "Other daughters would be grateful for parents who sacrificed so much." She ended with a line about how she hoped I could live with myself, knowing I abandoned the people who gave me everything. I read it twice. The audacity would be funny if it didn't hurt so much. She had made our entire relationship into a transaction. Every meal she fed me, every roof over my head. She kept a running tab in her mind, and now she was cashing it in. I forwarded the email to myself in 3 different folders: documentation, evidence, proof that this isn't normal parent behavior. Then I closed my laptop and tried to eat dinner, but my appetite was gone. Laura's insight, changing everything. My second session with Laura happened 3 days later. I brought printed copies of the email and told her about my parents showing up at my building. She read the email carefully while I sat across from her, picking at my thumbnail. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me. She asked how I felt reading it. I told her angry and sad and confused all at. I showered and changed 3 times before settling on jeans and a sweater that looked casual but took effort. The diner was one of those old-school places with red vinyl booths and laminated menus, and Julian was already waiting when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, and his smile made my stomach flip. We slid into a booth and ordered coffee, and I realized I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since high school. The conversation started easy with small talk about our weeks, but then shifted into something deeper. He told me about his apartment search and asked my opinion on neighborhoods. I told him about a project at work, and he asked detailed questions that showed he was actually listening. 3 hours passed before I noticed, and our coffee cups had been refilled 4 times. The waitress kept giving us looks like we should order food or leave, but neither of us wanted to move. That's when Julian leaned forward and asked if we were dating or just hanging out. The directness caught me off guard, and I felt heat creep up my neck. I told him I'd like to be dating if he was interested in taking that risk with me again. His smile spread slowly across his face, and he reached across the table to take my hand. He said yes before I could second-guess myself, and the relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. We finally ordered actual breakfast, even though it was past noon, and sat there eating pancakes while holding hands across the table like teenagers. When we finally left the diner, the sun was bright and everything felt lighter somehow. I drove home floating on happiness, but it crashed the second I saw my phone. Missed calls from family members I barely knew, and a voicemail from my Aunt Alina. I almost deleted it without listening because I was tired of defending myself to people who never cared before. But something made me press play. Her voice was quiet and careful as she said she thought my parents were wrong, and she was sorry for what they put me through as a child. I stopped walking in the middle of my living room and replayed it to make sure I heard right. She said she'd noticed things back then, but didn't feel it was her place to interfere, and she regretted not speaking up. The validation hit me so hard I had to sit down. Someone from my family actually saw the truth and wasn't making excuses for them. But mixed with the relief was anger that it took this long. That she watched me go without and said nothing. That she's apologizing now when it would have mattered so much more then. I called her back because I needed to hear more. She answered on the first ring, like she was waiting. We talked for an hour, and she told me things I didn't know she noticed. How I wore the same clothes constantly. How there was never food in the house when she visited. How my parents always had money for themselves, but nothing for me. She said she thought about calling someone, but my parents always had explanations ready, and she didn't want to cause family drama. I told her I understood, but part of me didn't. Part of me wanted to scream that her silence hurt me too. Alina shifted the conversation and told me my mother had been calling all the relatives with increasingly dramatic stories about my cruelty. She said my mother was claiming I'd cut them off completely, refused to let them see me, that I'd abandoned them in their old age and wouldn't help with basic necessities. I felt my jaw clench as I listened. I told Alina the truth, about them showing up at my apartment and being escorted out by security, about the email demanding $200,000, about the cease and desist letter. She sighed and said that sounded more accurate than my mother's version. She promised not to share what I told her with other family members, and I felt grateful to have at least one ally. Before we hung up, she told me she was proud of me for setting boundaries, and she hoped I'd stay in touch with her even if I didn't with my parents. I promised I would, and I meant it. After the call, I sat on my couch feeling like maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Building new strength, facing old fears. Monday morning, I walked into work feeling different. Lighter somehow, despite everything happening with my family. I dove into my projects with a focus I hadn't had in weeks, and actually enjoyed what I was doing instead of using it as a distraction. Melody stopped by my desk mid-morning with coffee and commented that I seemed lighter. I told her about starting therapy and reconnecting with an old friend, keeping the details vague, but letting her know things were moving in a positive direction. She perched on the edge of my desk and told me she was proud of me for taking care of myself and not letting family guilt control my choices. Her support meant more than she knew because she didn't owe me anything, but gave it anyway. We talked for a few minutes about her weekend and normal work stuff, and it felt good to focus on something other than drama. When she left, I turned back to my computer and actually smiled the code on my screen. Progress felt possible for the first time in a while. Tuesday evening, I forced myself to attend the support group Laura recommended, even though every part of me wanted to cancel. I drove to the community center and sat in my car for 10 minutes, working up courage to go inside. The meeting room was small, with chairs arranged in a circle and 8 other people already sitting. The facilitator welcomed me and explained the format without making a big deal of me being new. People shared stories, and I listened with growing recognition. A man talked about his mother showing up at his job demanding money. A woman described her father's drunk phone calls, blaming her for his problems. Someone else shared about feeling guilty for having boundaries with parents who neglected them as kids. Every story sounded disturbingly similar to mine, and I realized I wasn't crazy. This was a pattern. These were tactics. Other people had survived this and come out the other side. When it was my turn to share, I kept it brief and just said I was dealing with family stuff and learning about boundaries. Nobody pushed for details or offered unwanted advice. They just nodded with an understanding that felt like its own kind of validation. Hearing others describe the same guilt and manipulation helped me feel less alone and less like I was overreacting. Maybe my parents really were the problem and not me. During the support group, a woman named Paulina shared about her mother demanding money for cosmetic procedures, and I froze. The story was so similar to mine, it was eerie. She talked about feeling guilty for saying no and relatives calling her selfish. When the meeting ended, I approached her carefully and asked if she went to Lincoln Elementary. Her eyes widened, and she looked at me closer before her face lit up with recognition. She remembered me, and we exchanged numbers right there in the parking lot. We agreed to get coffee later this week, and I drove home feeling like the universe just handed me something important. Someone who knew my family during my childhood and could validate my memories. Someone who understood because she lived something similar. I texted Julian when I got home and told him about the group and running into Paulina. He texted back asking how I was feeling, and I realized I was feeling hopeful, like maybe I could actually get through this. Deepening connections, facing painful truths head-on. Wednesday, I met Julian for dinner at a Thai place downtown and told him more about the support group. He listened with the same patient attention he always gave me and asked thoughtful questions about what I was learning and how I was feeling. He never once suggested I should just forgive my parents or try to work things out. He never implied I was being too harsh or should give them another chance. His consistent support of my boundaries made me trust him more deeply. I realized I'd been waiting for him to tell me I was wrong, but he never did. We ordered pad thai and spring rolls, and I found myself relaxing into the conversation, telling him things I'd never told anyone. How guilty I felt for having money when they don't. How I still sometimes think maybe I am ungrateful. How scared I am that everyone will side with them and I'll end up alone. He reached across the table and took my hand and told me I wouldn't be alone, that he was here and not going anywhere. The certainty in his voice made something inside me settle. Julian started talking about his own family dynamics, and I was surprised by his openness. He described parents who are loving but struggled with his decision to leave France permanently. They wanted him close, and he wanted his own life in a different country. He talked about the guilt he felt choosing his own path over their wishes, and how it took therapy to understand he could love them while still making different choices. He says they eventually accepted his decision, but it took years and lots of difficult conversations. His perspective helped me see that healthy families can disagree without resorting to manipulation and punishment. That love doesn't mean giving up yourself to make others happy. I asked if he still feels guilty sometimes, and he admitted he does, but he's learned to sit with that feeling instead of letting it control his choices. We talked until the restaurant started closing and the staff began stacking chairs. Walking to our cars, he pulled me close and kissed my forehead. Told me we'd figure this out together. I believed him. The final, desperate attacks and the choice to let go. Thursday morning, I woke up to a voicemail from my mother, and my stomach dropped before I even listened. Her voice was shaky and dramatic as she said she'd been diagnosed with depression, and it was my fault for abandoning her. She said if anything happens to her, it will be on my conscience. The emotional manipulation was so blatant, I almost laughed. Almost. But underneath the absurdity was fear that maybe she was right. Maybe I was destroying her. I saved the voicemail and tried to go about my morning, but it sat heavy in my chest. That evening, I brought it to my therapy session with Laura and played it for her. She listened with a neutral expression and then asked what I noticed about the message. I said it felt manipulative, but I still felt guilty. She nodded and helped me identify it as a classic guilt-tripping tactic. The diagnosis that may or may not be real, the blame placed entirely on me, the veiled threat about something happening to her. Laura pointed out that my mother was trying to make me responsible for her emotions and mental health when that's not my job. She asked if my mother mentioned seeing a therapist or taking medication, or any actual steps to address this depression. I realized she didn't, just the diagnosis and the blame. Laura helped me see the pattern, and by the end of the session, I felt steadier. Laura asked if I'd considered what outcome I actually want with my parents, and the question stopped me cold. I realized I'd been so focused on defending my boundaries that I hadn't thought about long-term goals. What did I actually want? Did I want them in my life at all? She waited patiently while I thought. I told her honestly that I didn't think I wanted a relationship with them anymore, that the cost to my mental health was too high, that every interaction left me feeling worse about myself, that I'd spent my whole life hoping they would change and love me the way I needed, and they never have. Saying it out loud felt both liberating and terrifying, like closing a door I'd been holding open my whole life, hoping someone would walk through. Laura asked how it felt to say that, and I told her it felt like grief, like I was mourning parents I never really had. She nodded and said that's normal, that I could grieve what I needed and didn't get, while still protecting myself going forward. We sat with that for a while, and when I left her office, I felt raw but also clear. I knew what I wanted now. I wanted peace, and that meant letting them go. A new beginning, secured by legal boundaries. Friday evening arrived, and I cleaned my apartment 3 times before Julian was supposed to show up. I kept checking my phone and rearranging throw pillows, and wondering why I was so nervous about someone I'd known since high school seeing where I live. The doorbell rang at exactly 7, and I opened it to find him holding a bottle of wine in one hand and flowers in the other. He smiled and told me my place was beautiful, and I realized he was nervous, too. We walked into my kitchen, and I put the flowers in water while he opened the wine. He asked what we were making, and I told him pasta, because it's easy and hard to mess up. We worked side by side, chopping vegetables and boiling water, and it felt natural in a way I wasn't expecting. He told me about his apartment across town and how he was still unpacking boxes from his move. I told him about buying this place 2 years ago, and how it was the first time I ever felt like I had a real home. The pasta finished, and we sat at my small dining table, eating and drinking wine and talking about nothing important. He complimented my cooking, even though it was just spaghetti, and I laughed and said he was being too nice. After dinner, we moved to the couch with our wine glasses, and the conversation shifted. He asked what I wanted from this. I froze, because I wasn't expecting that directness. He said he wasn't interested in casual dating anymore, and he wanted a real partnership with someone who was willing to build something lasting. I told him I was scared of getting hurt again, but I wanted the same thing. He reached over and took my hand and said we should communicate openly about any concerns as they come up. I agreed and felt like we just made some kind of promise to each other. Then he leaned in and kissed me, and it was both exactly like I remembered and completely different. We spent the rest of the evening on my couch, talking and kissing like teenagers, but with the awareness of adults who know how rare this kind of connection is. When he left around midnight, I walked him to the door. He kissed me one more time and told me he'd call tomorrow. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling happier than I had in years. Saturday morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop on my nightstand. I reached for it with my eyes still half closed and saw 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. My stomach dropped before I even started reading. The messages were from cousins and aunts and uncles I'd barely talked to. I opened the first one, and my hand started shaking. My mother had told everyone I threatened her during our last phone call. She was saying I told her terrible things I never said. Several relatives were demanding I apologize, and others were calling me abusive. I read through all the messages and felt physically sick from the gaslighting. I knew exactly what happened during that call, and none of it involved threats. I got out of bed and paced my apartment, trying to calm down, but the panic kept building. I called Alina because she was the only family member who might believe me. She answered on the second ring and asked if I'd seen the messages. I told her yes and asked if she'd heard what my mother was saying. She confirmed that my mother was telling people I said things I never said. Alina asked if I had any proof of what actually happened, and I realized I should start recording phone calls with my parents for documentation. She warned me that things might get worse before they get better, and suggested I prepare for possible problems. I thanked her and hung up, feeling like the ground was shifting under my feet. Saturday afternoon, I searched online for lawyers who handle family harassment cases. I found one with good reviews and called her office, expecting to leave a voicemail. A woman answered, and I was so surprised I almost hung up. I explained my situation, and she said she had an opening in an hour if I could come in. I drove to her office building and took the elevator to the third floor. The lawyer was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She listened while I explained everything about my parents, the escalating demands, and the lies they were spreading now. She took notes and asked specific questions about the harassment pattern. She explained restraining orders and cease and desist letters, and the process for documenting everything. She recommended starting with a formal cease and desist letter that clearly stated my boundaries and the consequences for breaking them. The letter would demand they stop contacting me directly, stop spreading false information about me to family members, and stop appearing at my home or workplace. I agreed immediately, and she said she'd draft it and send it to me for approval. I left her office feeling like I'd taken real action instead of just reacting to their attacks. Sunday morning, I texted Paulina from the support group and asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. She responded within minutes, saying yes, and we agreed on a place near my apartment. I got there first and ordered a latte and sat at a corner table. She walked in 10 minutes later and hugged me before sitting down. We started talking about our shared experiences growing up, and I was amazed at how much she remembered. She told me about times she came to my house and noticed there was no food in the fridge, or my parents were drunk in the middle of the day. Having an outside witness to my childhood helped fight against the gaslighting my mother was attempting now. She validated specific memories I have of wearing the same clothes to school and eating lunch alone. I told her about the acne cream incident, and she remembered me pulling away from everyone that year. She said she tried to reach out, but I wouldn't let anyone in. We talked for 3 hours until the coffee shop started getting crowded. Before we left, she told me she went no contact with her own parents 3 years ago and hadn't regretted it once. She described the peace she'd found in not constantly defending herself or managing their emotions. I realized that's what I wanted, too. She offered to be a support person as I navigated setting firmer boundaries, and I accepted without hesitation. Monday morning, I was at work when my phone buzzed with an email from the lawyer. She sent me the draft cease and desist letter for review. I opened it during my lunch break and read through the formal language, spelling out my boundaries. The letter demanded my parents stop contacting me directly, stop spreading false information about me to family members, and stop appearing at my home or workplace. It stated that breaking these rules would result in pursuit of a restraining order and possible legal action for lies. Seeing everything written out in legal terms felt powerful, like I was taking control instead of just defending myself. I read through it twice and made one small change to clarify a detail. I emailed it back to the lawyer with my approval. She responded, saying she'd send it via certified mail to my parents' address, with copies to Alina as a witness. I felt anxious, but also relieved to have taken formal action. That evening, I called Julian and warned him that things might get messy when my parents received the letter. He told me he wasn't going anywhere and he'd support me through whatever happens next. His steady voice calmed something inside me that had been panicking all weekend. Tuesday evening, I walked into the community center for the support group, and the familiar faces greeted me with smiles. I took my usual seat in the circle and waited for everyone to arrive. The facilitator started the session and asked if anyone had updates to share. I raised my hand and told them about sending the cease and desist letter to my parents. The room went quiet as I explained what the letter said and how my lawyer helped me draft it. When I finished talking, 3 different people nodded with understanding looks on their faces. A woman named Sarah shared that she sent a similar letter to her mother 2 years ago, and it was the first step toward real peace. A man across the circle told us about getting a restraining order against his father and how the legal boundary gave him permission to stop feeling guilty. Another member described the relief of having documentation when family members accused her of lying about the abuse. Their stories made me feel less alone and more prepared for whatever happens when my parents get the letter. The facilitator reminded everyone that setting boundaries is self-care and not cruelty, no matter how our parents try to frame it. She said, abusive parents will always call boundaries cruel because boundaries threaten their control. I left the meeting feeling stronger and more certain that I made the right choice. Wednesday morning, I checked the tracking information on my phone and saw that my parents received the certified letter at 9:30. I put my phone on silent and focused on work, but I could feel it buzzing in my desk drawer every few minutes. By lunchtime, I pulled it out and saw 47 missed calls and 32 text messages from my parents and various relatives. My hands shook as I forwarded all of it to my lawyer without reading any of the messages. She texted back within minutes, saying this was perfect documentation of their refusal to respect boundaries. The fact that they were contacting me within an hour of receiving a legal letter demanding they stop contact proved they had no intention of following rules. I felt vindicated and terrified at the same time. My phone kept buzzing throughout the afternoon, and I forwarded everything to my lawyer as it came in. By the time I left work at 5, I had over 100 missed contacts from family members. The volume was overwhelming, but my lawyer said it strengthened our case significantly. Thursday morning, I woke up to a voicemail from my father that made my blood run cold. His voice was screaming and slurred, and he was threatening to sue me for emotional distress. He said I was a terrible daughter, and he was going to take me to court and make me pay for what I'd done to them. He called me names I won't repeat and said the lawyer fees would bankrupt me. I saved the voicemail and sent it to my lawyer before I even got out of bed. She called me back immediately and said the voicemail was actually helpful for our case because it showed threatening behavior. She asked if I'd received anything from my mother, and I checked my texts. There was a message from my mom saying, "I've killed her and she hopes I'm happy now." The dramatic manipulation would be almost funny if it wasn't so disturbing. My lawyer said we needed to pursue the restraining order sooner than planned, because these messages suggested escalating behavior. I felt scared, but also clear that I was making the right choice. My parents were showing everyone exactly who they are. Thursday evening, Julian picked me up for dinner, and I was grateful for the distraction from the family chaos. We went to a quiet restaurant with dim lighting and soft music. He asked how I was doing, and I told him about the voicemails and texts, but then I asked if we could talk about something else. He smiled and started telling me about a book he just finished reading. We talked about our favorite authors and genres, and I realized how much we still had in common. He told me about places in France he wanted to show me someday. He described walking through lavender fields in Provence and eating fresh bread in Paris cafes. He talked about a small village where his grandmother lived and how peaceful it was. I noticed he was talking about future plans with me included, like it was already decided we'd be together. The casual confidence in his voice helped ground me when everything else felt unstable. For 2 hours, I forgot about my parents and lawyers and just enjoyed being with someone who sees me as worth planning a future with. The final breaking point and legal protection. Friday morning, I was at my desk reviewing code when the receptionist called my extension. She sounded nervous as she told me there were 2 people in the lobby demanding to see me. My stomach dropped and I asked who they were. She said they claimed to be my parents and they were causing a scene. I told her to call security immediately and not to send them up under any circumstances. I walked to my office window that overlooks the parking lot and watched as 2 security guards escorted my parents off the property. My mother was crying and gesturing wildly. My father was red-faced and yelling. They came to my workplace, despite the cease and desist letter explicitly forbidding this exact thing. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. She answered on the second ring, and I explained what just happened. She asked if security had documentation, and I said I'd get it. She told me this workplace violation was grounds for an emergency restraining order. I hung up and went down to talk to the security supervisor. He already had incident reports written up and offered to provide copies for my lawyer. I thanked him and returned to my office feeling like I might throw up. Friday afternoon, my lawyer filed for the emergency restraining order, and I had to leave work early to go to her office. She had me sit down and walked me through what I needed to provide. I spent 2 hours writing out a detailed statement about the harassment pattern, starting from my mother's initial surgery request. I described every demand for money, every guilt trip, and every lie they told family members. I wrote about the Facebook post and the email itemizing my childhood costs. I detailed the apartment building incident and the voicemails and texts that came after the cease and desist letter. Writing it all out in chronological order made me see clearly how much I'd tolerated over the years. I'd been managing their behavior and emotions since childhood, and the pattern had only gotten worse as I'd tried to set boundaries. My lawyer reviewed my statement and added her own documentation of the contacts we'd received. She filed everything electronically with the court, and we waited. 3 hours later, she got an email saying a judge had reviewed the petition and granted a temporary restraining order. The order forbade my parents from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. There was a hearing scheduled for Monday to determine if the order should be extended. I left her office feeling exhausted, but also relieved that there was finally a legal barrier between us. Finding solace and a true partnership, Saturday morning, I packed a bag and drove to Julian's apartment. He opened the door and pulled me into a hug before I even said hello. I'd told him last night about the workplace incident and the restraining order. He took my bag and led me inside. His apartment was smaller than mine, but cozy, with books on every surface and plants in the windows. He'd made coffee and bought pastries from a bakery near his building. We sat on his couch, and I finally let myself relax. He asked what I needed, and I told him I just needed to not think about my parents for a while. He nodded and suggested we watch movies all day. We spent Saturday on his couch, working through his collection of French films with English subtitles. He made lunch and dinner and checked on me without being overbearing. He gave me space when I needed it and held me when I started crying. By Saturday night, I felt safe enough to actually sleep. Sunday morning, I woke up in Julian's bed, and he was already awake reading. He smiled when he saw me open my eyes and asked if I wanted breakfast. We made scrambled eggs together in his tiny kitchen and ate on the couch. The normalcy of it felt healing after the chaos of the past week. We spent Sunday talking about everything and nothing. He told me stories about his childhood in France, and I shared memories from before my parents' neglect got really bad. We existed together in comfortable silence when we ran out of words. In the afternoon, We went for a walk around his neighborhood and held hands like we were the only two people in the world. When we got back to his apartment, he made tea, and we sat on his balcony watching the sunset. During a quiet moment, he turned to me, and his expression was serious. He told me he was falling in love with me again, or maybe he never stopped. He said he wanted me to know where he stood because he didn't want there to be any confusion this time. My throat got tight, and tears started falling before I could stop them. I told him I loved him, too, and I probably never stopped either. He pulled me close, and I cried against his chest with relief and fear and hope all mixed together. He promised we'd get through this together, and for the first time in my life, I believed someone when they said that. The resolution, freedom, and a new future. Monday morning, we drove to the courthouse together for the restraining order hearing. Julian waited in the hallway while I met with my lawyer. She reviewed what would happen and reminded me to stay calm no matter what my parents said. We walked into the courtroom, and I saw my parents sitting on the other side with their own lawyer. My mother looked frail and sad, like she'd been crying for days. My father looked angry and kept glaring at me. The judge called the case, and both lawyers approached the bench. My parents' lawyer started talking about how I was a vindictive daughter who abandoned my elderly parents in their time of need. He painted me as cruel and heartless and said the restraining order was retaliation for them asking for help. My lawyer stood up and presented the documentation. She showed the judge the cease and desist letter and the timeline of contacts that came after. She played the voicemail of my father screaming threats. She showed the text from my mother saying I killed her. She presented the security reports from my apartment building and my workplace. She showed the Facebook post and the email itemizing my childhood costs. The judge listened without expression and then asked my parents if they had anything to say. My father started to speak, but the judge cut him off and told him to let his lawyer talk. Their lawyer tried to explain that my parents were just concerned and didn't understand the legal letter. The judge looked at them and said that showing up at someone's workplace after being told in writing not to contact them shows a clear disregard for boundaries. He granted a 1-year restraining order and warned my parents that any violations would result in criminal charges. My mother started crying loudly, and my father stood up, looking like he wanted to argue. The bailiff stepped forward and my father sat back down. The judge dismissed us, and I walked out of the courtroom with my lawyer. Julian was waiting in the hallway, and his face lit up when he saw me. My lawyer shook my hand and reminded me to call if my parents violated the order. Julian took my hand, and we walked out of the courthouse into bright sunlight. The relief I felt was overwhelming and physical, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. We got in his car, and he asked where I wanted to go. I realized I was hungry for the first time in days and suggested lunch. We stopped at a small cafe and ordered sandwiches and sat outside in the sunshine. The world felt lighter without the constant weight of managing my parents' emotions and defending my choices. My phone buzzed, and I tensed up, but it was just a text from Alina. She said she heard about the restraining order, and she was proud of me. She said she'd support whatever relationship I chose to have or not have with my parents going forward. I texted back, thanking her, and put my phone away. Julian reached across the table and took my hand. We sat there in the sun, eating lunch, and I let myself imagine a future where I wasn't constantly fighting battles I never asked for. A quiet, powerful conclusion. The next morning, I woke up with a strange lightness in my chest, like someone removed a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. I checked my phone, expecting the usual flood of missed calls and angry messages, but there was nothing from my parents. The restraining order was working. I got ready for work and actually felt excited about the day ahead instead of dreading what fresh drama might arrive. At the office, I threw myself into a new project, and my productivity surprised even me. Melody stopped by my desk around lunch and commented that I seemed different, more relaxed. I told her the legal situation was handled, and she gave me a knowing smile. We grabbed sandwiches from the cafe downstairs and ate in the break room, talking about normal things like weekend plans and a new show everyone was watching. The ordinariness of it felt like a luxury. That evening, Julian came over after work, and we cooked dinner together in my kitchen. He chopped vegetables while I handled the pasta, and we moved around each other easily, like we'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. We ate on my couch with plates balanced on our laps, and he told me about a difficult translation project at work. I actually had the mental space to listen and engage instead of being consumed by family crisis. After dinner, we watched a movie, but I fell asleep halfway through with my head on his shoulder. He woke me gently when it ended and kissed me goodnight before heading home. The routine felt healing. My therapy session with Laura on Wednesday focused on processing the restraining order hearing and what comes next. She asked how I was feeling now that the immediate crisis had passed, and I realized I felt guilty for feeling good. She helped me understand that relief is a normal response to escaping an abusive situation, not something I should feel bad about. We talked about the support group and how hearing other people's stories had helped me recognize patterns I couldn't see in my own life. Laura gave me homework to journal about moments when I feel happy without immediately waiting for something bad to happen. Tuesday evening, I attended the support group and shared about the restraining order being granted. Several people congratulated me, and one woman who went through something similar offered practical advice about what to do if my parents try to contact me through other people. Paulina sat next to me and squeezed my hand when I got emotional talking about how strange it feels to not be constantly managing my parents' feelings. After the meeting ends, we grab coffee at a nearby shop and talked for over an hour. She tells me she's proud of how far I've come in just a few months, and I realized she's right. I am different now. The weeks passed in a blur of work projects, therapy sessions, support group meetings, and time with Julian. I started sleeping better and my appetite returned. My apartment felt like a home instead of just a place to hide. Julian and I fell into a comfortable rhythm of seeing each other several times a week, and I found myself trusting him more with each conversation. He's patient when I have moments of anxiety about the relationship, never pushing but always reassuring. One night, he tells me he's falling for me all over again, and I believe him because his actions match his words. 2 months after the restraining order hearing, I received a call from my lawyer. She tells me a letter arrived from my mother that was forwarded through her office per the court order. My stomach dropped, and I asked if I had to read it. She says I don't, but she's reviewed it and thinks I might want to, that it's different from previous communications. I told her to scan and email it to me, and I'll decide after talking to Laura. That evening, I sat in Laura's office with my laptop open to the email containing the scanned letter. My hands shook as I clicked to open the attachment. The letter was handwritten on plain notebook paper, my mother's messy cursive filling 2 full pages. I read it out loud to Laura, my voice breaking several times. My mother wrote that she started seeing a therapist after the restraining order was granted. She said the therapist was helping her understand how her actions affected me throughout my childhood and into adulthood. She acknowledged specific incidents, including the acne cream, the birthday meals, leaving me leftovers while they ate real food. She wrote that she's starting to see how she prioritized her and my father's wants over my basic needs. She said she wanted to apologize without expecting anything from me in return, that she understands if I never want to speak to her again. The letter ends with her saying she hopes someday I can be happy, and that she's sorry for making that harder than it should have been. I finished reading and looked at Laura with tears streaming down my face. Part of me wants to believe my mother is really changing, that therapy is helping her see what she did wrong. But a bigger part of me is scared this is just another manipulation, a new tactic to get around the restraining order. Laura let me sit with my feelings for a few minutes before speaking. She reminded me that real change takes years, not months, and that one letter doesn't undo decades of harmful behavior. She said it's okay to feel both hopeful and skeptical, that those feelings can exist together. We talked about what responding might look like and what not responding might look like, and she emphasized that both choices are valid. Over the next few days, I thought constantly about the letter. I read it multiple times, analyzing every word for hidden meanings or guilt trips. Julian asked if I wanted to talk about it, and I showed him the letter. He read it carefully and then told me he thought my mother might be sincere. But that doesn't mean I owe her anything. His perspective helped me see that my mother taking steps to change is good for her regardless of whether it changes our relationship. I decided to write a response through my lawyer. I kept it brief and clear. I wrote that I received her letter and I appreciate her going to therapy. I told her I'm glad she's working on understanding how her actions affected me. But I also wrote that I'm not ready for contact yet, that I need more time to heal and work on myself. I said I'd reach out if and when that changes, but she shouldn't expect it to be soon. I end by saying I hope therapy continues to help her. I send the draft to my lawyer, and she files it with the court and forwards it to my mother's attorney. Setting that boundary without feeling crushing guilt feels like a major milestone. I tell Laura about it in our next session, and she celebrates the progress with me. That evening, Julian comes over and cooks my favorite meal to celebrate. We eat at my small dining table, and he asks me questions about what I'm learning in therapy. I tell him about recognizing healthy relationship patterns and learning to trust consistency. He reaches across the table and takes my hand, telling me he's committed to being consistent and trustworthy. I believe him. Paulina texts me after I tell her about the letter and my response. She writes that she's proud of how far I've come in just a few months, that the person who gave her parents everything, hoping to earn love, wouldn't have been able to set that boundary. I read her message several times and realized she's right. I am different now. I'm learning that love isn't something you earn through perfect behavior or financial support. Real love is given freely by people who see your worth. 3 months into our renewed relationship, Julian suggests we take a weekend trip to the coast. I agree immediately, and we spend the next week planning where to stay and what to do. Friday afternoon, we leave work early and drive 3 hours to a small beach town. We check into a modest hotel with an ocean view and spend the evening walking on the beach. The sound of waves and the smell of salt air clear my head in a way nothing else has. We have dinner at a seafood restaurant and talk about everything and nothing. That night, I sleep better than I have in months. Saturday morning, we wake up early and walk on the beach before it gets crowded. The sand is cool under my feet, and the sun is just starting to warm the air. Julian takes my hand as we walk, and I feel completely present in the moment, not worried about what might go wrong or waiting for happiness to be taken away. We find a quiet spot and sit on the sand watching the waves. Julian turns to me with a serious expression and tells me he wants to build a real future with me. He says he's not talking about getting engaged tomorrow, but he wants me to know his intentions are serious. He wants us to move in together next year and see where life takes us. I feel tears start, but they're happy tears for once. I tell him I want that too, that I'm ready to build something real with someone who actually loves me. We talk about what our life could look like, where we might live, how we'd combine our routines and spaces. The conversation feels natural and exciting instead of scary. For the first time, I let myself dream about a future without constantly bracing for it to fall apart. We spent the rest of the weekend exploring the town, eating good food, and talking about our plans. Sunday afternoon, we drive back to the city, and I feel different from I did on Friday. A final, powerful statement of self-worth and chosen family my parents may never change, and some family relationships may be permanently damaged. But I'm building something better with people who actually love me. Julian, Laura, Paulina, Melody, even Alina in her own way. These are people who show up consistently, who respect my boundaries, who celebrate my growth instead of punishing it. That's enough. That's more than enough. It's everything I needed and never had, and I'm finally letting myself have it. Pause, then a direct, sincere question to the audience. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with family, even when it felt like the hardest thing you've ever done? I'd really love to hear your experiences in the comments below.